Alrighty, folks. Good evening and welcome to the MES Study Group. This is session number 12, and this is the Spring 2016 Study Group. So this is our last session. Now, please forgive me. We've got some new things going on right now with regard to Google Hangouts, Webinar Jam. So things are going a little bit slow. So please bear with me. We're going to get a good recording on this. And I may not be able to see you in the room, but I'm going to try to fix that right now. We've been playing around with this, folks, since last week to make sure everything works. And it has been interesting, to say the least. So if you would hold tight for just a second. If you're out there and you're listening in, please bear with me as stuff working. We've been working on this for a while now, and you may not be able to get into the actual conference room, but we're going to see what we can do here for you. So please accept my apologies as we try to get everything working here and going. We had some changes to Google Hangouts over the last week or so, and it's made it very, very interesting for us. You can watch the live presentation, but I'm not sure you're going to be able to submit questions. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. If you're listening in out there, I'm going to ask if you would to submit your questions to messtudygroup@gmail.com. Okay, so shoot your questions over to messtudygroup@gmail.com, and hopefully we'll be able to pick those up along the way. Now, I'm going to periodically check my standard email here just to make sure that no one's trying to email me because they can't get in. So this is being recorded. So if we have any problems, you should be able to get information. So I'm going to continually check my email here. I got my trusty phone with me. So I'll continually check email along the way. We're just getting started here. So we'll see kind of how this goes. So please, if you would hang tight in there with me. Right now, we've had some changes to our webinar software, and this is all through Google Hangouts. Google has made some changes in this in the last couple days, and they've made it kind of interesting for everybody. But we're going to work through this guy and make it all work. So forgive me as I do a little bit of housekeeping here, kind of get everything arranged. As I said, I need to thank Jason Hodge for his great help today, helping me figure all this out. We've been working on this now since last Tuesday. We actually had to cancel a webinar last Tuesday, our MES Study Group session number 4 for our Fall 2016 Study Group. And we're actually going to do that session this evening at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Time. So we're going to do the same thing we've always done before. We're going to do a presentation here, and we're preparing you now to take the MEST final written exam. So this session is going to talk about the final written exam as far as some strategies you can use as far as getting ready for the exam. Biggest thing I can tell you is, folks, don't fret over it. I know some of you say, well, I'm not a good test taker. If you've gone through all of these MEST quizzes and you've turned all of them in, you've done all the case studies, folks, you're going to do fine. We set it up so that you would have to do those quizzes. We wanted you to write out the answers. So we made you do narratives because it's going to make it that much easier. And remember, the MEST final written exam is 200 multiple choice questions. Now, one thing I need to warn you about is make sure you go into the lessons that looked at medical communications. There's a PDF download there that includes prefixes, suffixes, root words, and abbreviations that you need to be aware of. There are roughly about 30 prefixes, suffixes, root words, and abbreviations on the final exam. Please make sure that you go through those, because if you do well on those abbreviations, prefixes, suffixes, root words, I guarantee you'll pass the final examination. We find a lot of people don't spend any time reviewing those, and as a result, it really does throw them off. And folks, literally, the prefixes, suffixes, root words are gimmies. They're just 100% gimmies, okay? So if you would, let's see if we can do a slide presentation here. Move one thing out of the way here. We're going to go to our slide presentation. Give me just 1 second. Now, I'm actually watching this live on YouTube as I'm going through the presentation. So I'm actually seeing the delay that you guys are seeing. So it's not real time for me. It's actually delayed for me on this end. So that's a little bit interesting, watching yourself and you're delayed along the way. So kind of interesting. So let's see here. Let's see if we can go over, and let's see if we can go to screen share here. Okay, we're going to share my screen, and that should actually take us here. And let's go to our slideshow, and we're good. Alrighty, everyone, good evening and welcome to the MES Study Group. This is session number 12, our final session for the Spring 2016 Study Group. And in this session, we're going to look at the MES written exam review. So we're going to actually start to talk about what this final examination is going to look like, okay? So if you would bear with me, I'll give you some ins and outs and some do's and don'ts on what to do with this, what to do as far as getting ready for the examination. So hold tight. This won't be a long session, but it'll be a session that'll be pretty informative for you. So again, we're looking at the exam review for the written portion of the exam. And let's go through a couple things. Now, you actually have 3 hours for the MES written exam. Okay, you will have 2 hours for the practical exam. So total overall is you'll have 5 hours for the MES final examination. 3 hours for the written portion, 2 hours for the practical portion. Now, if you finish the written portion early and you want to use that time toward the practical portion, that's fine. We give you a total of 5 hours. For most of our MES examinees, it usually takes them about 2.5 hours to complete the exam. So you should have more than enough time. But the written component, as you can see here, is 200 written questions. They're all based on medical exercise training scenarios. So it's all MET scenario based, which means we give you a short paragraph, maybe 5 or 6 sentences, that describes a scenario with a medical exercise training client. We then give you a number of questions that go along with that scenario. And with each question, we have either multiple choice answers, matching answers, or true false. So there's no narrative on this exam. There's nothing you have to write out. With the written exam, it's all multiple choice, matching, or true false. Now, here's the key. You've got to pass with a score of 80%. So that means we have 200 written questions. You've got to get at least 160 right. That means you can miss as many as 40. That's why I mentioned earlier, make sure that you go back to the medical communications lesson in the MEST program and make sure in that lesson you review the prefixes, suffixes, and root words. The reason is roughly 30 prefixes, suffixes, root words, and abbreviations on the final examination. We find people who forget about reviewing for those prefixes, suffixes, root words, and abbreviations are the ones that usually don't pass the MEST final examination. Now, I will say this, our passage rate is about 87 to 89%. The MEST program has more than prepared you to take the final examination. We don't do any trick questions. We don't do any K-type questions where, you know, if the moon is in, if it's a blue moon and, you know, it's leap year, and if it's a rainy day, question A is correct, or then question B is wrong. No, we try to make it very straightforward for you. So we're not here to try to trip you up or trick you or anything like that. You do need to understand the information. You do need to be able to critically think about the information, but you'll see with the scenarios we'll give you, if you read through the MET scenarios, it'll give you a pretty good idea of what's going on with the client. And then all you have to do is just simply base your answers on the scenario we give you, but that answer is going to be based on what you learned in the MEST program. Now, with regard to how to study for the examination, okay, use the MEST exam review guide. Now, you can download the exam review guide. I believe it's lesson number 49 or lesson number 50 from the MEST program. There are 228 concepts, topics, things of importance that you need to understand and be competent in to pass the MEST examination. 228. These are the things that you need to know as a medical exercise specialist when you get out there. Now, you've gone through all those videos. You've watched those videos. You've answered all the questions. These are just 228 items that what we'd like for you to do, instead of sitting down and studying them and trying to just saturate them into your brain, we'd like for you to take those 228 items in the MEST exam review guide and discuss them with a friend, loved one, or colleague. Just sit down and talk about them. Now, before you panic and say, oh no, Dr. Mike, there are 228 items, let's look at it this way. You know more than 228 things about fitness. What you've done in this course is taken all that information that you know from a fitness standpoint, and you've now applied it to medical conditions. So look at it this way. Take those 228 items, look at each one of them, and sit down with a friend, loved one, or colleague and explain it to them. Here's the great thing about human beings. All of our existence is based on the idea of history being made by telling stories. So literally what you're going to do when you have to discuss the components of the rotator cuff, we're going to ask you to explain them to a friend, lover, or a colleague. And you know what'll happen along the way? If you don't get all four components correct, you're going to correct yourself. But then once you correct yourself, you've now told the story, and that now allows you to retain the information. Instead of memorizing it, you now retain it, or more importantly, you start to master it. So don't try to memorize this stuff. Explain each concept to a colleague, loved one, or in the mirror to yourself, and you'll find that's the best way to learn it rather than trying to memorize it. And folks, I'll guarantee you, the stories that you understand are probably better than you'll ever be able to do as far as memorization. Once you tell a story, you understand. I'll give you an example. Let's say you had to get from your house to the local post office. Okay? Let's say I've never been to your neighborhood before. And I say, hey, I'm coming to visit your facility, but I need to drop a package off at the post office first. Could you give me directions? Sure. You would say, hey, Dr. Mike, go down to Elm Street, make a left, go over 2 blocks, and behind the Safeway store, or behind the grocery store, as a kid, we grew up with Safeways, excuse me, but behind the grocery store, that's where the post office is. So you go to the end of the block, make a right, and it's right there. You could explain that to me. That's a story, folks. It's something that you aren't memorizing it, you just simply recollect it because you've done it so many times. So by telling the story, it allows you now to reinforce and master this information rather than trying to memorize it. And you don't have enough cotton swabs to plug up your ears, your nose, your mouth, your eyes to keep the information from oozing out and losing it when you take the exam. You're better off, instead of trying to memorize it, just explain it to a friend, loved one, or colleague, and that way now you master it and retain it. May take a little bit longer to study for the exam, but you know what will happen? Once the exam is over, you'll retain a lot more of it. So that's the best recommendation we have for you. Now, remember, to take the final examination, you must submit all the MEST exams. I'm sorry, MEST quizzes, excuse me, not exams, quizzes, okay? You need to select an exam proctor. Now, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, Toronto, Houston area, and there's some other cities around the country, you could actually, or around North America, I should say, because you can do the same thing in Victoria, BC, and as I said, Toronto. We do have testing centers in those cities: New York, Washington, here in Houston, Seattle, Los Angeles, Chicago, well, outside of Chicago, Toronto, and Victoria, British Columbia. Okay, if you're not in one of those areas, you'll need to select an exam proctor. It has to be a licensed physician, physical therapist, chiropractor, nurse, licensed massage therapist, or a DO. Now, in certain situations where you can't find any of the above, it can be a certified medical exercise specialist through our organization. Okay, and the reason we do that is because, number one, another MES is not going to let you kind of hedge on this exam and kind of, do a little bit of non-approved activities with regard to exam, as in looking in a book. And we also feel like most medical professionals are people that are of good integrity. They're going to make sure you do the exam correctly. So once you do find an exam proctor, or you decide to go to a testing center, we're going to need you to provide this information if you're using a proctor: the proctor's name, their email address, and their phone number. Now, we're going to email the exam to them. So whatever exam date you give us, we're going to email that exam to them. And when we email that exam to them, it's going to include the exam instructions. And they're going to get that exam and the instructions about 48 hours before the final examination is due. Okay? Now, also, we ask you to give us at least 10 days notice when you schedule your exam. So today is November 1st. If you want to take the exam on November 6th, that's going to be pushing it for us. We ask you to set this thing up so you're taking the exam after November 11th. So you give us at least 10 days, okay? Now, other thing, it's not required that you complete your observation hours before you take the examination, but we do highly recommend it. Now, it's not mandatory, as I said before, but you have to complete 10 observation hours, and we find that those observation hours really do make a difference when you take the examination because you've seen this stuff. Along with that, there's a form that you'll download from the MEST lessons, and that form, I believe it's in lesson number 1. You also will find it with, I believe, lesson number 49 and 50, and also in the introductory page where you can actually download that form, and it allows you to document your hours, your supervisor will just simply document the hours on the form. And then you can just simply scan it, fax it, or take a picture of it and email it to us. Okay. Now, again, it's not mandatory that you do the hours before the exam, but here's the incentive. If you do the observation hours before you take the examination and you pass the exam, we're going to issue a certificate that's good for 2 years. If you don't do the observation hours, your certificate will only be good for 1 year. And at the end of that year, you're going to have to complete those observation hours, but you're going to have to pay the renewal fee. Okay, so you're going to have to pay that renewal fee. Whereas if you do the observation hours, your certificate is good for 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, you'll have to renew, which is a standard procedure. But if you're trying to take the exam and you successfully pass the exam, but you haven't done the observation hours, your certificate is only good for 1 year. Okay, so now that kind of explains how the process works. Now, if you're really interested in building your practice, go over to medxpronetwork.com to get more information. But let me stop here for a second. Let me stop the sharing here, and let's come back to me, and let's talk a little bit more about this. Okay, all right. So, a couple things. Don't get bent out of shape about the exam. If you've gone through all the quizzes, and you have to complete all the quizzes before you take the final examination, if you've gone through all those quizzes, folks, you know this information. You've written out narrative answers to these, to the information, to the questions in the quizzes. We set it up that way to give you more confidence, because if you can write out the information, it'll be very easy for you to actually now just simply answer multiple choice questions. Now, we've already talked about the practical exam in a previous session, our last session. So don't worry about the practical exam for right now. Let's just concentrate on the written exam. Now, if you are part of our MEST study group, you should also have access to a series, I believe there were 9 or 11, between 9 and 11 videos that I shot a number of years ago, about 2 years ago, that went through every item in that MEST exam review. We give you background information on it. Along with that background information, we even tell you where you can find the information. So please log into the MEST study group members area. You should also see a tab there for exam review videos. Please, if you would, click that tab, take a look at those exam review videos, and it'll take you through each one of the items in the MEST exam review document. That way, it helps reinforce all the information that you've learned in the course. So here's my recommendation. Before you sit down and go through every note, every video, go through the MEST exam review guide. The items that you're not familiar enough with that you can explain it to a friend, loved one, or colleague, go back through those items and then review those items. The items that you're familiar with, don't review those. So review those items you're not familiar with until you get to the point you can explain it to a friend, loved one, or colleague. Then you're ready to go. Now, we also have a practice examination. And if you would, I know we were supposed to do this after our last session, but we weren't able to do it because we had some technical difficulties. We'll upload a sample exam that has, I believe, 22 written questions as well as 2 case studies. So you can now take the opportunity to see how well you're going to do. If you would, download that sample exam, go through the questions, go through the case studies, and then shoot me an email. And in the email, just simply number your answers, put the answers into the body of an email, and then write out your answers to the case study. Email that to me at drmike@postrehab.com, and that should give you an idea of what it looks like. All right? So don't get bent out of shape. You already understand this stuff, but along the way, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to pick up the phone and call. But everything you need is in the exam review guide, but you've already learned this. If you've turned in all the quizzes and the case studies, you're more than prepared to take the final examination. And we don't do trick questions. It's challenging, but we're not going to do the trick K-type questions to trip you up. All right? So that pretty much is it. That's how this process works. Again, we're not in the business to try to trick you. If you've gone through all the lessons, turned in all the quizzes, folks, you're ready for this. You really are. So don't doubt yourself. You're ready to take the final examination. And folks, I'll tell you, we've been doing this now for 23 years. That exam review guide has everything in it you need. And we went back through the exam itself to make sure we included everything. And please don't forget to make sure you look at the medical communications lesson. Make sure you go through all those prefixes, suffixes, root words, and abbreviations, because those are going to be important on the final examination. All right. So with that, I'm going to say good evening. I'm going to wish you the best on the exam. And if you have any direct questions for me, email me at drmike@postrehab.com. All right. So with that, have a great evening. You've done a great job if you turn in all the quizzes. Remember to give us 10 days notice before you take the examination. Find an exam proctor, get in there and do those observation hours, and get started now going through that exam review guide. If you have any problems with accessing the review videos, the exam review videos, shoot me an email. Patty, I know you're out there, and I know we need to talk to you about getting access to the MEST study group members area. If you get a chance, give me a call at 888-610-0923. And with that, folks, I'm going to wish you well. Thank you for being part of the MES study group. And if you have any questions, again, shoot me an email or give me a call. All right? Thanks again. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.